Alrighty, so the international break is over, and I'm pretty sure that is going to be something that every team is going to be happy about because I know there was a lot of teams that were not happy, especially a lot of managers that were not happy with guys that are missing due to international duty, and even some team are basically using that as an excuse to basically justify why they lost very big in last week's action. But that being said, I'm pretty sure there are still going to be some teams that maybe won't play their players that are out due to international duty for the full 90 minutes because, some of them just got back from the middle of the week. But we do have, in terms of match week number 6, is that we have 14 games. That's going to be all happening between the window of 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and then 12:30 a.m. Eastern and 9:30 p.m. Pacific. So yeah, when that of course happened, oh boy, I don't know how I'm gonna cover this. In fact, I even made the decision I'm not gonna cover it. I'm just gonna ground hop because it's just gonna be insane for me to basically trying to keep up with that many games at the same time, including 8 games that's gonna be happening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and that includes the first game that we're gonna talk about, which is Atlanta United versus the New York Red Bulls. In fact, this first four is all games that are happening at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. And speaking of the international break, I'm pretty sure there's no team that are more happier that the international break is over than Atlanta United. I mean, after a 6-1 drumming that they took in the hand of the Columbus Crew, I'm pretty sure Atlanta is very happy the fact that they are going to get some of their players on international duty back. Well, not some of them, but all of them, and some of these key players like Thiago Almada, Miles Robinson, and so forth are going to be back in the fold. Now, coming into this game, Atlanta 3-1-1, while the Red Bulls 1-3-1. All-time meeting, believe it or not, the Red Bulls, this is, as I mentioned before, whenever Atlanta plays against the Red Bulls, it's never a favorable matchup for Atlanta, unless if we talk about that one game that pretty much gave Atlanta them moving on into MLS Cup back in 2018. In fact, that was like it's hard to believe that is still to this day the only win that Atlanta United has against the New York Red Bulls. And I guess as the old saying goes, I mean, if you're going to win your only game against a certain opponent that you don't do well, might as well do it in a playoff game like what we saw in that game when they win 3-0 in the first leg, and even though they lost the second leg, it wasn't by three goals against the New York Red Bulls. But yeah, like I said, the Red Bulls have Atlanta's number 9-4-1 in all-time meeting. For the last 5 games for Atlanta, they started the season with a 2-1 win against the Quakes. Then it was a 1-1 draw between Toronto. Then a 3-0 road win against Charlotte. A 5-1 win against the Portland Timbers. And then we don't. If you're an Atlanta fans, you're probably thinking, yeah, let's not speak about what happened in the last game. But unfortunately, I have to mention that them losing 6-1 to the Columbus Crew in the last game. Now, for the Red Bulls, they lost 1-0 against Orlando City, then drew 0-0 against Nashville, then drew 1-1 against Minnesota, then won their first game of the season 2-1 at home against Columbus, and the last game they drew 1-1 against Charlotte FC. I mean, it's been a slow start for the Red Bulls in this one, but like I said, they'll be fancying themselves knowing the fact that this is a team that they have relatively good history against, and let's see whether or not if that's going to continue. And for Atlanta, even though this is not a favorable matchup for them, if they're going to prove themselves that they are truly back, they need to of course win this game. So we'll see how this game of course will turn out. But moving on, the next 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific game is FC Cincinnati versus Inter Miami. So in some way, I think both of these teams are kind of trending different direction. For Cincinnati, it's pretty much pointing up. They're second in the Eastern Conference, while for Miami, yeah, after that quick start, they have dropped down and have really kind of not only come back down to earth, but maybe started to hit the ground hard after the start that they have with a 2-0-3 record. And as I mentioned, Cincinnati 3-2-0 all-time meeting. Though Miami does have the all-time meeting 4-1-1, but keep in mind this is during the time when FC Cincinnati was a laughing stock in the league, and pretty much everybody has FC Cincinnati number. But during the time when FC Cincinnati was actually a good team, yeah, Miami did struggle against the Cincinnati team. Now, in terms of the last 5 games, it was a 1-0 win that Cincinnati has against Nashville. Then it was a free draw between them and Chicago. Then a 1-0 win against the Seattle Sounders, a 0-0 draw against Orlando City, and they opened the season with a 2-1 win against Houston. For Miami, they won 2-0 against Montreal, won 2-0 against the Philadelphia Union. Again, this was part of the quick start that they have, and then ever since things have not gone well whatsoever for this team. 1-0 loss on the road against NYCFC, a 2-0 loss against Toronto FC, and somewhat kind of embarrassing loss to the Chicago Fire. I mean, depending on how you look at it, they were down 2-0. They did make it interesting, but yeah, against a team like the Chicago Fire, especially when you're playing at home, you should not be losing. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a tall task for Miami, who trying to bounce back after this 3-game losing streak to now go to a place like Cincinnati, place that, is a team that currently really good so far this season and expect to be very good to pull out with points. But at least one thing I will say about Miami and maybe give them a slim hope, Cincinnati hasn't really been a team that has been doing that well at home. I mean, they've always been a good road team. This season, though, I will say that they did at least get those two big home wins to kind of reverse trend. But I'm pretty sure for Inter Miami, if they want any chance to win this one, they hope that trend will reverse back to last season when the home form was definitely a bit of an issue for the Cincinnati team. Moving on. We got the Columbus Crew versus RSL. So speaking of a team that is kind of trending the wrong direction after a good start, that's kind of the case for RSL. I mean, after that impressive opening day win against the Vancouver Whitecaps, they have pretty much lost three straight. In fact, it's technically 1-0-3. That's their record. I wrote the record wrong there for RSL. But yeah, in terms of the all-time meeting, 12-5-8 in favor of Columbus. And in the last 5 games, Columbus, of course, they lost their opening day matchup against the Philadelphia Union 4-1, but they bounced back with a 2-0 win against DC, drew 1-1 against Toronto, lost 2-1 on the road against the Red Bulls. But in the last game, we talked about the demolition that they had against Atlanta. 6-1 was the final score. While for RSL, like I said, after a great start to the season, winning 2-1 against Vancouver, just like Miami, they've lost 3 straight. Lost 2-0 to Seattle, lose 2-1 at home against Austin, and then they took a 4-0 thrashing in the hands of St. Louis City SC. So, yeah, it feels like both of these teams are kind of coming into this game in opposite direction. Columbus just fresh off of a big win, and it will be also interesting to see whether or not if there is going to be a letdown coming into this one, because anytime when you have a big win in one week, it's really hard to try to follow that in the second week. And also, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of decision Will Nancy is going to make in terms of the roster. I mean, I'm assuming he's still going to put his strongest team, but knowing the fact that the depth pieces played really well last week, I'm pretty sure he probably maybe rewards some of those guys that play very well to get some starting minutes in this game too. But either way, for RSL, just like how I said Miami, this is probably not the opponent that they want to face to stop the bleeding. The same goes for RSL in this case. But now moving on to the next match, we got the LA Galaxy versus the Seattle Sounders. So this is the only game that is technically on national television. Again, when you look at the ratings on Fox, it has been ugly, and it shouldn't be a big surprise because it feels like the way that Fox Sports is broadcasting these games on a linear TV deal, it's been kind of like an afterthought. Nobody really cares that it's on Fox. Maybe some people just kind of watch it on Apple TV like I do. But nevertheless, in terms of the all-time meeting between both of these teams, it is very tight. 15 wins apiece, 13 draws. I mean, both of these teams are definitely two teams that you know when this matchup is going to happen, a lot of people will be keeping an eye on. But for the Galaxy, they have not had a great start to the season. They lost 3-1 on opening weekend. Well, not opening weekend, but on the second match day against FC Dallas. Drew 0-0 against Sporting KC. Drew 1-1 against Vancouver, and then drew 0-0 against Portland Timbers. Whereas for the Sounders, it's been a great start to the season. They won 4-0 on opening day against Colorado. Won 2-0 against RSL. They did lose 1-0 on the road to FC Cincinnati. But then they go back home to drew 0-0 against LAFC. And then they put an absolute thrashing on Sporting KC as part of the Jordan Morris show in that game with a 4-1 win against Sporting KC. So safe to say that, yeah, Seattle does have the upper hand in this one. And again, for the Galaxy, just like what I said about RSL and Inter Miami, this is probably not the opponent you want to face if you're trying to get stop the bleeding of just off to a rough start to the season. But unfortunately for the Galaxy, well, actually, I will say that fortunately for the Galaxy, unlike where RSL and Miami has the daunting task to go on the road, at least the Galaxy are playing at home. Though again, home field advantage. I don't know. It's going to be a big factor for this team because of the boycott that is going, and I heard it's going to continue heading into to this game until their president Chris Klein decide to resign. Again, it will be very interesting to see how they perform in this one, and also they're desperate to try to get Chicharito back in this team. I think he's still about a couple of weeks out before he's come back from his injury, and they really need him because I really think they really miss his presence going forward on the attacking end. Now, moving on, in the next match, we got New England versus NYCFC, and I had to check the standings twice, but it's hard to believe that New England is actually at the top of the Eastern Conference. Well, actually, I wouldn't say it's hard to believe because we knew that the Revs were going to have a bounce back year, and in some way, they're kind of back to where we expected, at least from 2019 when they pretty much run the table and won the Supporters Shield standings. But that being said, I will say that, maybe some Revs fans are kind of a little bit disappointed that people are kind of underrating them a little bit, and I understand why. Because when you look at the wins that they have as we go into the last 5 games, yeah, most of the wins that they have are against relatively easy opponent, and I would say this maybe would be the first big test against an NYCFC team that again they have been kind of inconsistent so far this season with a 2-1-2 record. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, 10-5-8 in favor of New England. And in the last 5 games for the Revs, they did win 2-1 against DC United, then win 1-0 against Nashville. The only loss that they suffered this season was in the hands of LAFC, where they got absolutely demolished in that one 4-0. Though they did win 3-0 against Houston, and then they go on the roll on opening day by winning 1-0 against Charlotte FC. For NYCFC, on opening day, it was not a great day for them. Or opening weekend, it was not a great weekend for them. They lost 2-0 to Nashville. Drew 1-1 against Chicago. They did finally get their first win of the season against Miami with a 1-0 victory. Then they won 3-2 against DC, of arguably the best performance that they had this season. But then they followed that with an absolute egg against the Houston Dynamos on the road with a 1-0 loss. So again, it's a very inconsistent team, and a team that I think the reason why they're kind of inconsistent is because it feels like the way that they like to play really works well when they play at Yankee Stadium, which is where they have both of their wins, which is not a big surprise because Yankee Stadium has always been a tough stadium to trying to get points, albeit in a controversial way. But yeah, this is going to be interesting in that again for New England if they want to prove themselves that they are definitely considered to be a threat in the Eastern Conference. This is a game that they need to win. Though again, there's going to be still doubters that's going to say, well, NYCFC has been inconsistent. They're not the same team as what we see in season pass, and that I think once we get into the part of the season where New England is going to have a tougher first schedule, then we're gonna see how it is because so far in their one big test that they had against LAFC, that maybe is a true litmus test of how good they are. Yeah, they failed miserably in that game. But moving on, we got Orlando City versus Nashville SC. So coming into this game, Orlando with a 2-2-1 record, while Nashville 2-1-2. And in terms of the all-time meeting, well, I would say this game has a high possibility of being a draw because so far of the 8 meetings that they played, 5 of them has ended in a draw. And in the last 5 games for Orlando City, they somehow went to Philly and ended the Union home winning streak that dates all the way back to 2021 with a 2-1 win against the Union. Then they also lay an egg at home to Charlotte FC in that one before throwing 1-1 against DC United and then drawing 0-0 against FC Cincinnati. And again, inconsistency is back with Orlando City. We saw this last season with this team where there's been some inconsistency, and it feels like it's back for this team. But for Nashville, yeah, the last couple of games it has not gone well for this team. I mean, a 1-0 loss to FC Cincinnati, a 1-0 loss to New England. They did win 2-0 against Montreal, drew 0-0 against the Red Bulls, and then won on the opening weekend 2-0 against NYCFC. But it's safe to say that the goals kind of have dried up for this Nashville side for the past couple of games. Though again, I think coming into this game, you know what they're gonna do. They're going to sit in a low block, and it's gonna be interesting to see how Orlando City is gonna break them down because again, this team so far they haven't really been that successful in terms of breaking down low block, and that Yeah, again, it's just been very inconsistent. Like there's been times where that attack has showed some flashes of brilliance, and then there's times where if you're an Orlando City fans, you're just basically pulling your head because even with the amount of talent that they had, it still looked like the same Orlando City side from last season. Still a team that has so much talent going for it on the attack, and yet it's been wasted because it's not fulfilling to its potential. But now moving on in the next match, we got the Philadelphia Union versus Sporting KC. So this is kind of the time where I want to kind of mention the fact that there is going to be CCL in the middle of the week. So for the teams that is still in part of CCL, it'll be interesting to see whether or not they do rest guys. And I'm pretty sure maybe that's not the case for the Union because I think in their first leg against Atlas, it is going to be at home. They do play against a struggling Sporting KC side, and again, Sporting KC is another road team that I would say that's that for a team that is struggling and desperately need to try to get points, and especially getting their first win of the season. Philly is probably not the team that Sporting KC won, especially from what I heard that it seems like Andre Blake could make his return in this game. Yeah, Sporting KC fans would just they would have flashback of all the bad luck that they had. Like that is the last goalkeeper that they want to face, and I'm pretty sure these players knows it too. That is the last goalkeeper you want to face if you're a team that is struggling to score goals and struggling in terms of finishing. But in terms of this one, the Union again 2-0-3, but again it's hard to tell how to say that this has been a slow start because they're suffering of what you usually see with CCL team or usually MLS team in CCL are struggling in the early part of the season because they're so committed to our CCL. But for Sporting KC, they're not in CCL, and it's simply a bad start for them. 0-2-3 to start the season. All-time meetings, 7 wins apiece for both of these teams and 6 draws. Last 5 games, the Union, of course, they had their long home winning streak came to an end with a 2-1 loss to Orlando City. Then they lose in a controversial way to Montreal 3-2 before winning 1-0 against Chicago. They did lose 2-0 against Inter Miami, and then they won 4-1 against the Columbus Crew. For Sporting KC, yeah, the last game, I'm pretty sure Sporting KC fans won't want to remember that one when they were on the wrong end of the Jordan Morris show with a 4-1 loss to Seattle. Then they lose 2-1 on the road against Dallas, drew 0-0 against the Galaxy, drew 0-0 against Colorado, and then lost 1-0 to the Portland Timbers. And this was part of the time when you could say Sporting KC was probably the most cursed team in the league with the way that no matter how many shots they put and no matter how many shots on goal that they put, they just cannot bury ones. And like I said, this is a rough one for Sporting KC to try and to get a reserve because the Union is going to be very mad after what happened in the last resort. And I'm pretty sure they're going to play like that and kind of play with that passion, that hope that they can carry that into that first leg game against Atlas in CCL. So, yeah, for Sporting KC, I hate to say it, but if they are looking to get their first win, this is probably not the game that they're going to get their first win, and their slow start probably is going to continue. Now, moving on, we got Toronto FC versus Charlotte FC. Now, what's kind of interesting about Toronto is that as much as some people say that they kind of got off to a slow start, they've only lost once so far this season. I mean, it feels like it's a bad start for Toronto, but it's hard to believe they've only lost once this season, and it's kind of a miracle the fact that they've lost once this season because with the amount of injuries that they had to deal with, it's quite remarkable the fact that they're staying afloat. Now they're playing against a Charlotte team that is also not off to a great start with a 1-1-3 record. But in terms of the all-time meeting, this is only the third meeting between both of these teams. Toronto winning their first two. For the last 5 games, Toronto was able to get a 0-0 draw against the Quakes. Then they got a 2-0 win against Inter Miami, and that's a rare win against Inter Miami because they always tend to struggle against Miami, and they got pull off with a bit of. I mean, I wouldn't want to say a surprising win, but definitely a result that I don't think any TFC fans thought that was going to be the game where they get their first win of the season. Then they drew 1-1 against Columbus, drew 1-1 against Atlanta United, and then they lost 3-2 against Toronto FC. And again, that's the only game that they've lost this season. And you could argue that probably shouldn't have been a loss because of the way that they were leading 2-1, and then they just kind of imploded in stoppage time in this one. So if they didn't implode that game, theoretically, TFC would be unbeaten right now. Now for Charlotte, they did drew 1-1 against the New York Red Bulls. They finally got their first win with a 2-1 win against Orlando City. But before that, it was a 3-0 loss to Atlanta, a 2-1 loss to St. Louis City, or actually not a 2-1 loss, but a 3-1 loss that they had against St. Louis City. And then on the opening weekend, they lost 1-0 at home for their home opener against the New England Revolution. So yeah, again, for both of these teams, they're definitely desperate to trying to get 3 points, and especially with both of these teams, that there's a lot of high expectation and they're kind of underachieving so far in the early part of the season. They're desperate trying to get all 3 points, and let's see who is going to get that. But that being said, I am now going to switch boards and look at the last 6 games that's going to be finished off match week number 6. All right, so in the last 6 games, we start off with Chicago versus DC United. So these are all the games that are not starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. In fact, this is the first of the Central Time Zone game with these games kicking off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Well, that's the advertised kickoff time. I mean, we know the time, the real kickoff time for all these games is 9-minute pass or 25-minute pass if the game is on Fox. But coming into this game again, this is like the game between TFC versus Charlotte, where it's between two teams that is near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. I definitely need to get 3 points to get their season back on track. But in terms of the all-time meeting, 28, 21, and 26 that both of these teams has had. I mean, both of these teams used to be big rivals when they were at the peak of their power in the early days of MLS. But last 5 games for Chicago, they did drew 1-1 against NYCFC before winning 1-0 against Chicago. Then they drew 3-3 against FC Cincinnati, and then somehow, in some way, they were able to win 3-2 against Inter Miami, despite the fact that they blew a multiple goal lead. For DC, they did win 3-2 against TFC, but that's all the happiness that DC fans have, because after that, it was a 2-0 loss against Columbus, a 1-1 draw against Orlando, a 3-2 loss on the road against NYCFC, and then a 2-1 loss at home against the New England Revolution. So again, both of these teams, I know you could say that both of these teams probably coming in this season most likely not going to make it to the playoffs, but pretty sure both of these teams are also want to get off to a good start. And that, again, when you have two teams that haven't got off to a good start, I mean, would you want to safely say that this is a desperation derby when both of these teams don't really have a lot of expectation? I mean, I guess maybe DC does have the expectation because of them kind of going a little all in push, even though signs are telling that they're probably not going to be a team that could compete for playoffs with a roster that they have. And then of course Chicago is Chicago basically. But yeah, I would say maybe you could say that it's a desperation derby for some of the most optimistic fans for both of these fan base that want to see the team get 3 points so that they can of course get themselves back on track. But that being said, moving on in the next match, we got FC Dallas versus the Portland Timbers. Man, there is a lot of games this week where I've seen where there are one team that is doing very, very well in the league against a team that is not doing very well in the league and are desperately need 3 points, and that is not going to happen because they're facing a really good team, which tells me that maybe we're gonna get some upsets in terms of these games. Now, I'm not sure if this is gonna be one of those because yeah, Dallas has kind of had Portland's number, especially when they are playing at home. I mean, I think for the last 2 games when they play at Toyota Park, it's been 4-1 wins in favor of FC Dallas. But for Dallas, 2-1-2. And by the way, you better believe Dallas is going to be angry coming into this game, because after what happened in the last game where they try so hard to get a point on the road against LAFC and had so many things that go against them, and then they thought that they did get that point when they got that hard fought equalizer, only for that to not be the case with LAFC retaking the lead. So they're desperate to try to get 3 points to have to bounce back what was just really a brutal resort for FC Dallas in terms of team morale. But for the Timbers, they also want to get things going, because besides that one win that they had against Sporting KC, it has been an absolute train wreck for this Portland Timbers season. 1-1-3 is their record. All-time meeting 11-10 and 10 slightly in favor of the Timbers. And for Dallas, again, they didn't get off to a good start as the season, a 1-0 loss for their season opener against Minnesota, but then they quickly turned that around with a 3-1 win against the Galaxy. They did drew 1-1 against FC Dallas, but then they won 2-1 against Sporting KC, and then of course again against LAFC. I really think they deserve a draw out of that one. It was very unfortunate for them to lose that game. But for the Portland Timbers, besides that 1-0 win against Sporting KC, which that game they didn't even look that well either. It was just kind of partially because Sporting KC couldn't finish and them just kind of holding on. The rest is pretty much not really good. I mean, a 3-2 loss to LAFC, a 2-1 loss at home against St. Louis, a 5-1 drumming that they took against Atlanta United, and then last week desperation derby for them to desperately getting their second win of the season. They don't get it. It's a 0-0 draw against the LA Galaxy. So yeah, again, the Timbers is rough. This is definitely not the opponent they want to see for them to turn the season around. But having said that, with all these teams that are struggling to face against good team, I guarantee you there's going to be one game this week. We're going to see a team that is struggling that is going to get the win against the favorites, because if there's one thing about MLS, which are kind of unpredictable, and we always will see some upsets, and I think these are kind of the game that we're probably going to see at least one of them being a major upset, and it has to be because again, some of these teams, getting off the slow start, there maybe show some desperation. I mean, not to a point where we're getting to near the end of the season where playoffs are at stake, but there are definitely desperation that it can get away from them. I mean, I know we're still only 6 weeks into the season, but things can definitely get away from you quickly if you go on a losing streak, and then next thing you know, you just go on another losing streak, and then you're really behind the eight ball, and just will have a monumental task to try to overcome. And I know in the past the Timbers has been able to overcome that, but again, I'm pretty sure a lot of Timbers fans don't want to see that again, and it's unfortunate that it feels like they're finding in the same situation that they've been last season and really for the past couple of years, getting off to a slow start, and that they're just hoping that eventually things will turn around for them. But this is going to be a tough one to kickstart that against a really good FC Dallas team, especially at home. But now moving on in terms of the next matchup, and if you would have told me that this would be a matchup between two teams that is unbeaten after 6 weeks, I would say that you're absolutely insane. But here we are, 6 weeks into the season. This is the battle of unbeaten, and this is probably the game of the week between St. Louis City and Minnesota United. St. Louis, as mentioned, it's hard to believe they are 5 for 5 in terms of the win category, whilst Minnesota, and keep in mind this is without Reynoso, they're somehow 2-2-0. Although theoretically they should be 3-1-0 because of the what happened in the last game against the Vancouver Whitecaps. But nevertheless, this is the first ever meeting between both of these teams, and for St. Louis, I mean, like I said, it's been nothing but wins for them. 4-0 win against RSL in the last game, 3-0 home win against San Jose, 2-1 win on the road against Portland, a 3-1 win against Charlotte, and then a 3-2 win against Austin for their inaugural game in their franchise history. For Minnesota, they drew 1-1 against Vancouver, then won 2-1 on the road against Colorado, then drew 1-1 against the Red Bulls before on the opening weekend they did win 1-0 against FC Dallas. And it's kind of interesting the fact that the Loons, they pretty much have won all their games so far this season on the road, but they haven't got themselves a win at home. I mean, they're kind of almost like trying to be the New York Red Bulls of last season. Remember how the Red Bulls had that very bipolar kind of start to the season where they can only win on the road, but when it comes to home form, that's been a huge issue, and that I don't know if that's going to be the same case for this Minnesota team. In fact, I probably think that that's not going to be the case because, like I said, the last game, it was very unfortunate of what happened in the last one, and that should have been their first home win of the season. But we'll see if they can stand up the task against a St. Louis team that, again, I know there's going to be some people that are still going to say that it's been a fluke start to the season, but I don't think so. I really think that this St. Louis team, this is a very organized team under Bradley Carnell, and yes, they've been getting some lucky goals because of those back passes, which I'm really hoping for this team. Minnesota better not turn those balls over, because I've seen this season they have times have the knack in terms of turning the ball over easily. Because if you turn the ball over against the St. Louis team, you know what's going to happen, and usually it's going to be John Kloss, the one that's going to bear it, because like I said, I think for the past couple of games, a couple of goals that he have scored has really just because of gifted turnover that gave right to him and just slots it home into the net. And that, yeah, again, this should be a mouth-watering matchup. And again, it's unfortunate that this is not on national television. I mean, I'm pretty sure the people that decided to pick which game is going to be on Fox didn't think that this game would be the one between two teams that is unbeaten up to this point of the season. But that being said, moving on in the next one, we got Colorado versus LAFC. So this is a matchup again, between a team that is really struggling against a team that is flying high right now. In fact, this is probably the most lopsided example because this is I think a battle, if I'm not mistaken, between the worst team in the Western Conference versus the best team in the Western Conference. Now, normally when you see that with LAFC with a 3-1-0 record and Colorado with an 0-2 free record. Just realized that LAFC basically had the same area code as one part of the LA County. That definitely would trigger some Galaxy fans there, seeing LAFC have the same area code as that. But nevertheless, again, anytime when you see these kind of matchup, you would think the team that is in the top of the standings will easily steamroll the team at the bottom of the standings. But as we have seen before, that's or that has never always been the case, and I've seen times where the team at the bottom of the standings can pull off a surprise result. And I think this could be one because, I think after the last game that Colorado played against Austin, that was easily their best game of the season. And that against an LAFC team that I don't know if they're gonna be resting some players for that CCL game against the Vancouver Whitecaps. If they are, Colorado maybe have a shot in terms of getting the win in this one. Now, in terms of the all-time meeting, and it's hard to believe, but Colorado has been able to beat LAFC. They've won 3 out those 8 meetings, albeit, LAFC does lead the all-time meeting with 5-0-3 record. It's also interesting. There's never been a draw in this meeting. But in the last 5 games, like I said, the last game against Austin, that was easily their best game with a 1-1 draw, and probably unfortunate to not get all 3 points because they were the better team in that game. But before that, they lost 2-1 at home against Minnesota. Lost 1-0 against the Quakes. Drew 0-0 against Sporting KC, and then in the opening weekend's matchup, I'm pretty sure that's a game that Rapids fan want to forget of a 4-0 pumping that they had against Seattle. For LAFC, yeah, in the last game, it was not pretty against Dallas, but they were able to win 2-1 in that one. Then they drew 0-0 against Seattle, won 4-0 against New England, and then won 3-2 against the Portland Timbers. So, like I said, this is a matchup you would think LAFC is heavily favored. I wouldn't be surprised Colorado might pull off a big upset in this one. And if it is the case, you know what I'm gonna say when I get into my review talking about this game. But anyway, moving on, in the next match is the San Jose Earthquakes versus the Houston Dynamo. So I was right when I did my quick recap after that game between the Quakes and TFC that the next game is between the Quakes and the Houston Dynamo. But the Quakes 2-1-2 and Houston 2-0-2, and both of these teams are kind of right next to each other in the standings. I think the Quakes is in 7th, while Houston is in 8th place, and there's no doubt the Dynamo, after a slow start to the season, they have rebounded nicely with those 2 home wins. But unfortunately, they're back on the road, and as a lot of Dynamo fans would say, that's usually an automatic L. But the good news is they play against the Quakes. And I don't know what it is, but Houston always tends to have the Quakes numbered, especially at home and even on the road too. Sometimes they can get a surprising result, and that is being shown in the all-time meeting. They lead the all-time meeting 16-4-9 over the Quakes. In the Quakes' last 5 games, it was a frustrating 0-0 draw against Toronto, and then they lost 3-0 on the road against St. Louis. But then they won 1-0 against Colorado, won 2-1 against Vancouver, and then they had that heartbreaking loss against Atlanta United on the opening weekend. But for Houston, like I said, they bounced back relatively well in the last 2 games and back-to-back games that they got clean sheet too. That's something you don't see often for the Houston Dynamo. But they got a clean sheet against NYCFC with 1-0 win. Then they got their first win of the season against Austin with a 2-0 win. But before that, they were shut out by New England with a 3-0 result, and then they lost 2-1 against FC Cincinnati in the opening weekend's matchup. So yeah, I think Houston, they have definitely played well so far this season, and that again, it's not going to be an easy task for the Quakes. And again, this is a team that they've always tended to struggle, no matter if they're good or bad. And I think for Houston, I mean, pretty sure a lot of Dynamo fans will want to keep a cautious optimism because they have had times where they get off to these kind of decent start. and then it just completely crater. And I don't know if that's going to be the case again for this team if they do get off to a good start again. But one thing for sure is that this should be an interesting matchup for two teams that you could say that they could maybe be on the cusp of potentially making the playoffs by the time this season is over. But that being said, moving on into the last game that I'm going to be previewing is an all-Canadian clash between the Vancouver Whitecaps versus Montreal. So always love to see when we have an all-Canadian clash in MLS. But for the Whitecaps, they are still searching for their first win, 0-3-2, while Montreal with a 1-0-3. And that in terms of the all-time meeting in this all-Canadian clash was a 9-4-8 right that Vancouver has over Montreal. But in the last 5 games for the Whitecaps, they're probably very fortunate that they were able to get a 1-1 draw against Minnesota with some call, with some certain call that kind of gone their way. But they also drew 1-1 against the Galaxy, drew 1-1 against FC Dallas. So that's 3 straight games that they have drawn, and all of them has been 1-1 draw. Well, then they lost 2-1 against the Quakes before losing 2-1 at home against RSL. For Montreal, they did win their last game. In fact, it's been a couple of weeks since they play. I think they were the lucky team in terms of not have to play during international break. But in the last game, they got their first win of the season, albeit in a very controversial way against the Philadelphia Union, 3-2. Then they they lost 2-0 to Nashville, lost 1-0 to Austin, and then lose 2-0 against Inter Miami in their first ever matchup. So yeah, it should be interesting. And again, Vancouver, like what I said about LAFC, we'll see if they might rest some of their players. Although again, because they are at home for their first leg, I don't think they're going to do so, and especially unlike where LAFC is in a good position right now, Vancouver is not. I mean, I will say that they have played a little bit better in the last couple of games, but it's now time for Vanni Sartini team to turn these draws into wins, because it's one thing to get draws, but eventually you got to get wins. I mean, you eventually got to get wins to get yourself higher in the standings, and we'll see whether or not if Vancouver is going to do so. In fact, I would say this is a huge opportunity to do so, because against a Montreal team that this season, I mean they've been kind of what I expected. Although I would say that it's been kind of a little bit disappointing, even with the amount of players that exit this team, and the new head coach in Hernan Losada in round not really getting the best of the players just yet. This is a huge opportunity for Vancouver to finally getting their first win, and especially it's at home too, a place that they've been very good in the past. You would expect them to maybe finally get their first win in this all Canadian clash. But that being said, that is pretty much it in terms of the preview of all 14 of these games. Like I said, let me know in the comments below what do you think of these games, and as always, let me know in the comments your prediction for these 14 games that's going to be happening tomorrow. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.